Okay, good evening. It's now 7:01, and I will call a regular meeting of the Village of Tinley Parks Plan Commission to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Looks like we have a full house this evening. Can we get a roll call, please?
Stanton.
Here.
Engel.
Here.
Manning.
Here.
Darrow.
Here.
Gray.
Here.
Aitchison.
Here.
Augustiniak.
Present.
Vic.
Here.
Chairman Shaw.
Present. Okay, we most certainly have a quorum. In fact, we have a full house here. On that note, I would just like to extend my thanks to Commissioner Stanton for filling in as acting chair at our last meeting. I appreciate that. With that, any communications from staff?
No.
Okay. We do have notice of public hearing here. I will address that when we get to the public hearing. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the February 21st, 2019 regular meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of that meeting?
So moved.
Moved Commissioner Stanton, second?
Second.
Second Commissioner Gatto. Any corrections or comments or edits on the minutes from the February 21st meeting?
No.
Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from the February 21st, 2019 Plan Commission meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. As I said, item number one this evening is a public hearing, short-term rental, text amendment. The village is the petitioner, so we don't have anybody here for that. And looking over the notice of public hearing, everything looks in order. Thank you. So with that, I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
So move Commissioner Augustiniak, second.
Second.
Second Commissioner Manny. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, our public hearing is open. Seeing nobody here from the public, we will dispense with swearing in. Given that the village is the petitioner, actually, I don't know the protocol on that, but I'm going to assume that by nature of being a public employee, you swear to tell the truth. We will commence with the staff report,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
So staff is proposing a text amendment to the zoning ordinance, section 2B definitions and section VB schedule of regulations for short-term rental uses. The purpose of this amendment is to add definitions and to modify the schedule of use regulations to permit short-term rentals in residential zoning districts and prohibit them in non-residential zoning districts. We had the workshop on February 7th, and following that, we had another meeting, but we continued that public hearing, mostly because staff was doing a little bit more research at that time, and has since come back with some more definitive regulations that are being presented to you tonight. I've gone over the background with the Airbnb, which is, the short-term rental that most people are common with. It is something that is growing and becoming more popular, and since that, communities are looking at how to regulate them. It is somewhat of a business use, being in a residential dwelling unit, and there are some communities that see a lot of these based on the nature of their tourism that might drive people to the community. Some communities like ours aren't seeing a whole lot, but nonetheless, it's important that we start at least looking at our codes and putting some regulations in, and we can adjust as we see fit. And there is no hard, fast rule on what is the best way to regulate it. There are some best practices that I had provided in our workshop, and every community has their own unique situation. For us, we do define short-term rental in a bed and breakfast definition per se, but we wanted to further differentiate bed and breakfast and actually call out short-term rental. The bed and breakfast in our community is actually permitted in a commercial district, and that really is for a business operation that is generally in a single-family home, but its primary engagement is with the overnight stay and temporary lodging with some ability to provide food. So with the amendment to the definition section, we are further articulating that the definition of bed and breakfast be amended to not include the definition of short-term rental. And then we're creating the new definition of short-term rental as a dwelling unit that is used as a primary residence by owners or renters, or a portion of such unit that is rented for less than 30 days at a time, with the exception of dwelling units owned by the federal government, the state, or any other agencies or political subdivisions, and facilities licensed by the state as healthcare facilities. Now, the definition that we're using is a pretty common definition. It's, so that is something that has been commonly used. And the community development, also, department looked at how the use chart is in our zoning code, and there were some best practices as mentioned before. Some of them we are, incorporating through the licensing program, and then some of them are going to be through the zoning code, and that is setting, specifically setting a neighborhood quota was one of those things that we would have to regulate through our zoning code. And then that is what staff has presented today in the amendment, is that at the workshop, there was consensus from the Plan Commission that we needed to look into creating some thresholds for the distances between short-term rentals from one another. So establishing a distance requirement is a common practice utilized in zoning codes for other uses. We see group homes or other uses that in concentration you don't want to be clustering together, so you establish some distance from each other. We calculated the average lot width of the R1 through the R5 residential zoning districts that we have in our community. And that average came out to about 80 linear feet is what the average lot width is in our community. So we tried using the measure of 500 feet as a distance requirement, which would then give you maybe approximately one short-term rental per every 6th home on a block. And this distance measurement would also include any right-of-way, so I just wanted to articulate that. For single-family attached, this would be approximately one townhome unit for every 6th townhome unit. We thought this was fairly reasonable. We can see how it pans out, but a 500-foot distance seemed to be an appropriate distance. And then the next zoning district would be our multifamily. I wasn't able to identify any communities specifically that had this limitation, although it was a recommended best practice. But based on that, we use the 25% of a building could not be occupied more than 25% could be occupied by short-term rental. Agreeably, this is probably difficult to enforce. Multifamilies do tend to have their own regulations, and they probably will regulate themselves better. But again, it's to have something that we can reference if we ever do get a complaint. We have something we can go to saying, well, here's what our regulations are, and I've discovered you're exceeding the percentage. So, but again, the intent of this is just to ensure that an apartment complex doesn't become completely short-term rental, which, is a concern, and it's limiting it is a way to handle that. So if then we make these changes, we are changing our schedule of permitted uses, and we're going to include short-term rental. It's an accessory use to a dwelling unit, and these would be permitted throughout all the residential zoning districts with some caveats that I've added. Letter P and Q, there'd be a little caveat there that limits the separation of 500 feet from all lot lines from any other short-term rentals. And then the other one would be the multifamily zoning districts that have the 25% of the total number of units are only allowed. And the rest of the items that get into some more detail with regulating short-term rentals will be regulated through the licensing program. That's where there's the administration of it, if there's violations, there's some ways that the village can revoke a license. This particular text amendment gives at least some zoning authority that we're able to apply. And when we review applications, we make sure they comply with the zoning code. And that was really the extent of the discussion. I did, Ken, you weren't here last time, but I did add some of the other additional communities. You were looking for some other towns that regulate it. A lot of people are taking the approach of taxing these businesses per se, similar to the hotel tax that is applied to regular hotels. That's gonna be discussed at village board, but I don't believe that's the direction they're going right now, is taxing them. The same hotel tax, but that, you know, that could change as well. But that's another avenue communities are going, to treat them more like a business and keep them on the same playing field. I think this is a good approach, first attempt to regulating these. We can continue to monitor this, see how it grows or doesn't grow in our community. And again, this is a new territory that a lot of communities are dealing with, and something to keep an eye on. So I did reach out to all those individuals that we believe were doing short-term rentals or were advertising. Did make some communication with some folks, just inquiring about what it was we were doing. Didn't get any additional feedback, but we did make an attempt to at least let them know, hey, some regulations are coming your way. Contact us if you have any questions. So I'm here if you have any other questions.
Okay, thank you. Seeing as how we don't have any objectors here, nobody from the public, Kimberly, I know we spoke earlier, there was some notice, not public notice, but I mean, you'd been in contact with some people on this.
Yeah, we sent individual letters to
Okay.
those that were advertising and letting them know what the regulations were going to be to contact us. Some of one I played phone tag with, haven't really talked to on the phone, but told them exactly where to find the code and the changes. And then the other one just wanted to email me knowing when the public meeting was. And again, I prefaced where they could find all the information.
Okay, good. So before we go any further, any questions from the commissioners? We could start down here with Commissioner Stanton.
As far as the communities that you show listed that say that they're doing this,
Yeah.
did they go, like, elaborate more on what they're doing? Like, as far as, like, how many they've been doing and how it's going, or, you know, any?
Evanston, I remember contacting them, and I really expected that they would have a lot more, and it was a really low number. I remember, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was definitely a dozen
I would
or
think that's
so.
something that maybe they wouldn't want to share, I don't know.
Yeah.
Something that's, but on the other hand, if you have a good relationship with some communities that are doing it,
Mm-hmm.
it'd be kind of nice to share things back and forth and say, you know, if we're thinking about doing it, then maybe
You're right.
they can caution us on a few things.
Yeah, and a lot of people are, again, it requires compliance.
Right.
So, you know, again, you have to hope people will follow the rules. So some of these towns, like Naperville, just recently are applying the hotel tax. But Evanston, I know I remember to ask them specifically how many they have, and they really don't have any, you know, a significant amount. And Oak Lawn I talked to, too, they said it's really, you know, a handful. But again, that could be just people not registering, and people might try it for a little bit and then not continue it, and then
Right.
so they kind of come and go. But I look to keep an eye on, there's a lot of attorneys and other planners following this topic in general, so it kind of comes up a lot, and people are constantly surveying each other. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Augustinian?
No, I'm just glad that we'll have some kind of language to, because, I'm of belief of personal property rights, and people should be able to pretty much do what they want with their own property, but we do need to protect the interest of the community, to have some kind of regulation, and the fact that because you said you identified a handful, 3, 4.
Yeah, we'd like
maybe
7.
7?
So, yeah.
We need, at least we'll be ahead of the curve and have something in place. And the language that I've read, I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, and I did want to preface, the way we're writing this, it has to be an owner-occupied unit that, is allowed to do the short-term rental.
So they can't do this full-time.
Correct. It has to be your primary residence.
Yeah.
And through the licensing, we'll have to find, they'll have to show that
So
proof that
they'd have to show their tax bill that shows they have the homestead
they
exemption.
live there, yeah.
So that that's their primary residence.
Yeah. Because that was what the concern was coming out. We have a few homes that aren't being lived in, but that's how they're supplementing their income, is just renting the home out in its entirety, so.
But that's probably something that's been going on for years, right?
The one particular issue has been going on for a few years.
But not
yeah.
just them in particular, I said just in general, other people. I mean,
Could be.
They rent their house for 6 months and go to Florida for 6 months.
Sure. You still have to list, and some of those people still list this as their primary residence, and we're not opposed to people that do that.
Right.
But they still have this
Right.
Tinley Park address as their primary home, and they live
Sure.
there. The problem people were seeing is that people were literally whatever reason, they could afford a second home and they don't live there at all, or whatever reason, the recession hit,
And
so
then you
they
have the
couldn't
issue of
sell their home.
Speculators coming in and buying properties that they're gonna try to turn
Yeah,
into.
and that's becoming a business too. New Orleans had a recent NPR discussion and how neighborhoods and blocks were being bought up for short-term rental, and that's a very touristy location, so that makes sense, but neighborhoods were just going away, and you would have 8 to 10 short-term rentals all in a row,
Right.
owned by entities. So-
Block-long hotels.
Yeah.
basically.
Okay, Commissioner.
So I apologize, I wasn't here at the February 7th meeting, but I'm most curious as to how this is going to be monitored.
Yep. And that is one of the challenges with this type of program, because the short-term rental, when you go to their website, until you book it, you get an address, and so you try to hone in. I guess, like anything, complaint-driven, maybe most of it might come in our way. That's how some of them have come in now. We will monitor these short-term rental sites. Hopefully through good communication with the community, we can get it out there, let them know what the intent of the program is, that there is a requirement. We notify the short-term rental sites, and they can update their sites and make note that the village in Tinley Park has a licensing requirement. We can make all those best efforts too. But it is one of these more challenging code enforcement.
Understood.
Okay. Yes, I have quite a few comments, actually. I understand, I agree, you can't stop progress, so you have to adapt to said progress. And I absolutely agree with having the primary owner or renter list that as their primary residence. What is the qualification, though? Because even Commissioner Stanton mentioned, if you're 6 months in Florida and 6 months here, do you need to be at your primary residence 51% of the time?
We're not putting that requirement on, we're just saying you have to show proof that you identify this as your primary residence.
Okay, like Chuck said, your homeowner's exemption.
Yeah, now is someone gonna, stretch that, and maybe be gone 9 months of the year,
Yeah.
but,
Well, on top of that, if somebody is claiming it as their primary residence, and they're claiming something else as their primary residence.
True.
They're violating other laws,
Yeah.
and they've got bigger problems.
And admittedly, some people I know actually work out of the country,
Yeah.
and it is their primary residence. They just, for work, whatever reason,
Yeah.
they're kind of transients themselves
Sure.
across the ways. But the reason I like the fact that you need an owner, though, who's invested, I did have, I still do, somebody in my neighborhood who had an issue with, and he was in a townhome, with his neighbor having basically transients right next door. They shared the doorstep, and it made them miserable because there was partying, rowdy, everything that was on page 2 of 7, where it said the oppositions. in the third paragraph where
Yeah.
guests disrupt neighborhood with parties, excessive parking, or misuse of parking, and security risks. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know their habits, right? A neighbor has an investment, they have a stake. But you mentioned all these kind of minefields you have to kind of navigate to kind of stick with the times. But I think having somebody having primary ownership there is a good thing. With that, and you also mentioned too, like, a lot of townhome and other organizations actually have their own set of bylaws which can say no renting. So they have the right to further regulate themselves. But getting to that, you guys mentioned, and this goes to kind of what Mary Ann was talking about in terms of regulation. So if I decided to go with a short-term rental and Mary Ann's my neighbor, she's out of luck because I got the license, right? Because
Yeah.
she's gotta be like 6 doors down.
Yeah.
So is this like a first come, first served basis? And
Yeah.
it is,
That's how it would have to be, yeah.
okay. And what if somebody isn't really actively renting but still got that license? I mean, it's to me, it's kind of a weird,
Yeah. And those are things that might get tweaked, but yeah, it would have to be,
yeah.
whoever gets it first sets the tone,
Yeah, I mean-
Similar to
Well,
how,
if you think of other kinds of licensing that we have here in town, for instance, a liquor license,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
an establishment could have a liquor license, and it's theirs, they have it, and they have a right to serve, and maybe they're not. Nobody else can have that license, right?
Right. But then you might also have,
It might be foolish.
you might also have people who just get the license, so they don't have neighbors who are short-term rental. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Some people may
could be
sit on that.
attractive.
There,
Yeah.
he just figured out the system.
Yeah, but with that said, I mean, I'm a straightforward guy. And I'm a rule follower. So the thing is, the other thing I noticed was for something like a townhome association, and I'm in like a 10-unit, 3-building 10-unit townhome association, and if you had 25%, that'd be in theory 2.5 units. So
Yeah.
that's more dense, and we're within 500 feet of each other. That's more dense than the one every 6 house. So that, I think, criteria has to be comparable. If one is going to be spread out because you're, I don't want to say fortunate enough, but like you are, a single-family residence owner, you don't have that kind of potential disruption. As I mentioned, one of my neighbors had many years back, where he even thought about moving, and they were good neighbors, and you don't want to lose good people in the community because of disruptive transient tenants who are there just for a short amount of time. But just something to think about. I'm not saying maybe 25% has to be modified a little bit.
Well, so as long as you bring it up, because that's what we're here for tonight.
Yeah.
I just want to hone in on it. It sounds like you agree that there should be a percentage limit.
Yes,
and-
caps.
And you're suggesting that perhaps 25% is too high. Would you have a number that you would toss out there for argument's sake?
I think it's dependent on how close the units are. So maybe there's distance criteria from the units and how they're, I think it can't just be a blank percentage. It has to take into account, as you mentioned, Kimberly, that, you guys did, I thought this was really good research, reaching out to all the communities. You guys did an excellent job. You have the 80-foot width, so you guys did the math with the 500. So I think instead of just a blank percentage, you have a percentage tempered with distances, and that's going to be, I know that's going to be dependent, and then that makes it a little bit more harder to kind of blanket regulate, but I think 25% is just too dense in a townhome association or a condo.
Well, to be clear, townhomes are still considered single-family, so that 500 distance applies
Oh,
to
okay.
townhomes. Multifamily gets you into the apartment, condo,
Oh, okay.
it's actually a commercial building code classification. So we would be looking at a multifamily building,
I'm sorry,
not a
okay.
townhome, and that would be the 25%.
Right,
Okay.
and 90% of associations will not allow more than 60% renter owner occupied because insurance will not insure you.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's what's in 90% of bylaws.
In mine, we have no renters.
Yeah.
So it's 100%
Yeah, if
none.
there is, it's a 60-40 split. You have to have
Okay.
60% residents, and then you can have 40%
Okay.
renters if, they allow it.
Well, I didn't realize it was just for apartments and
Yeah,
such,
no,
but.
no, no.
but
That's
you-
good to clarify that.
But you do want to make sure that the people who are doing that, although I know renters aren't as, typically as invested as, say, a homeowner, but you still want them, if they're living there, to, you know, have the same peace of mind as those who do. You know, as
Right.
long as they're somebody in the community that pays taxes and has an investment. It's, you know, it's easier to have to take care of things when you have an invested interest than you're just there for the weekend or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I thought you guys did a great job. I think it's proactive because this is something that is only going to grow and get bigger and bigger. So I think this is a good first step. As you kind of alluded to Mary Ann when she asked about regulation, you know, it's kind of just, we're getting the ball started, so it's fluid, and I think maybe there's, you know, maybe a year down the line or even sooner, maybe a second look to tweak things possibly.
Agree.
Excellent. Commissioner Gatto.
So, I'm a big fan of Airbnb, and every place I go now, I don't even stay in a hotel.
Right.
I do Airbnb or, you know, Home Away or one of them, because it's so much cheaper. But I do think that we need to adapt things, you know, for the village. I'm not saying we're gonna get an abundance, we don't really have that much that attracts people to come and stay for a short period of time.
Not yet.
Not yet anyways, yes. But I think that once that does start to evolve, we need to talk about the percentage of tax and
Yeah.
and do that route. Like, you know, Naperville and Schaumburg and, yeah. And that's all I have.
Commissioner Manning?
I was thinking about this in regards to the multifamily complex, like the condo, that where you have a common door, common entrance. I think about more of the security of the other unit owners that are not renting their, you know, their space. So I was just wondering, I mean, I don't have an idea, like how can you regulate that, or do the associations, they regulate how? Because, you know, if one person's renting their unit frequently or whatever, you know, you have a copy of keys that are common to the main door, probably laundry room, party room, what have you, and then, you know,
Right.
versus you know, a single family home or
I
a
would-
townhome, you know.
I would imagine that what's gonna happen is, I lived in a condo in town here for 16 years, and I was on the board for this, you know, association. And as this becomes more popular, what they'll end up doing is putting amendments into the, you know, the rules.
Right.
Stating that it can be used for an Airbnb, or, you know, you can't do any of that kind of stuff. Most places are kind of against that,
Mhm.
because of the safety purposes.
Right, right.
Yeah. Because, I mean, every Airbnb that I've stayed at has had like a lockbox or something, or you go to an office to get a key.
Yeah.
So they're not gonna constantly change that key to the
Mhm.
front door.
Well,
And most of
exactly.
the
So-
places I've stayed in has been condos, yeah,
Right.
or townhouses, you know, in Boston or New York or wherever it may be. And, you know, so I think it's going to be more of the associations that are gonna have to amend their bylaws, is what's
Right.
gonna happen. Mhm.
Well, I wonder, could we have some type of language like that, you know, so for a condominium wants to do that, like, okay, well, if you want to do that, well, you know, these are the things that you have to do, and get, you know, obviously your association to approve it, whatever, just so everyone's happy about it and not later on complain. You know, because again, you know, a condominium, you know, you have homeowners that's their investment, but then, you know, someone lets the renter in, whatever, they bash the walls, and then who pays for it, you know?
Right.
So it's just, you know,
I think that's worth noting, and it would be a part of the licensing agreement. We would make that individual show proof of their necessary approvals or
Right,
stuff
right,
like that. But
yeah.
those are good points.
I mean, that was my only concern, but besides, and I think it's, you know, good concept to, you know,
Okay.
to do.
Kimberly, I forgot to mention this, but who would be the local, it says require a local contact person. So like if somebody is in Florida, who would this, like, the local contact person be? And that would be,
Whomever that individual has authorization to. You
Okay.
know, some people, you know, I'm trying to think of some other scenarios I've dealt with when I ran rental programs. We had to always have an alternative person to notify or
Oh.
reach in the event that person was not able to be contacted. They authorize someone to
Right.
assist them, like particular if we had to get into the home for some reason. So, I mean, that'd be whoever that person decides that person will be.
Okay.
But it's good to have a second person in the case of emergency.
I 100% agree. Commissioner Gatto mentioned a lockbox. So yeah, if something goes wrong, you need
Yeah.
somebody available. Okay, excellent.
Commissioner
I
Hicks?
actually have no comments this time.
Commissioner Engel?
So I have a question about like the distance requirement, like say 500 feet. So basically that's it. If there's someone in your, next to you and you want to apply for a license, say you just moved in or something.
Right.
There's gonna be no chance that they could do like a request or like a special use or anything like that. It's just that's set in stone, 500 feet, if we adopt it that way.
Correct.
Okay. I just had a question about that,
Yeah.
how it would work.
Yeah, because, what would be the hardship,
Yeah.
We have these, we're setting this distance in place because we're trying to ensure that the character of the area doesn't,
Correct, yeah.
modify, so that's kind of a hard, fast, and someone might argue with me distance a little bit, and we could probably, get down to that, but, I think once you authorize a variation, then you'd just be opening the door up, because everyone's gonna wanna make that claim.
True.
So there might be some unique scenarios in how we calculate the distance that we could work with someone, but that'd be pretty much, that's the standard you have to meet.
Okay, thank you.
Good, good. And on that point, the distance, I would echo what a lot of the commissioners have said about, this is a starting point, and it's good that we put a framework in place. The more this becomes popular, that distance may shrink, it may grow, who knows, But at least we'll have a framework that just needs to be tweaked, the numbers or details, so. Can I get a clarification on a point here? The amended definition, first off, the amended definition for bed and breakfast versus the new definition of short-term rental, for me anyway,
Pretty close.
yeah, I'm not seeing a bright line difference between the two. I could, what are a couple of the specific factors that differentiate between the two?
Sure. So the bed and breakfast is meant to be, that's the primary operation, and they're only permitted in a B3.
So it's a
The
business and nobody effectively lives there,
Correct.
except the people who are renting.
Correct. And
Okay,
the short-term
that's-
rental is an accessory use to the primary dwelling unit, and then there is that threshold of, that is rented for less than 30 days at a time, because that's in there as well. But then this would also, through the licensing, we're gonna talk about food service.
Okay.
That they're not gonna be able to serve food, they can have snacks out, but not
Right.
full-on making breakfast for people. That'd be handled in licensing, but that's the biggest thing. The bed and breakfast here that is their primary operation. That's what they do day in and day out of that facility.
Okay, that's a good distinction. So the second point on the new short-term rental definition, it says, dwelling unit that is used as a primary residence by owners or renters. So does that mean, in theory, somebody could have a lease with the owner of the home, let's just say it's a home, and then they effectively sublet it on a short-term basis?
Right, and then again, that'd be regulated through the licensing. This person's denoted as a renter, we would need to make sure they have, the ability to do that. I mean, their lease would,
If you're qualifying them, that, I used the homestead exemption or something, they couldn't sublet it for short-term rental because they're not the primary owner of the property.
well, it's not owner, it's primary, it's their primary residence.
Yeah.
So if I rent, my apartment and I know I'm gonna be in Greece for 3 months, for whatever reason, I need help paying my rent, they might do the short-term rental program. Hopefully, they would license with us, and then we would need to make sure that they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, so I myself have concerns about that scenario, but I also don't want to advocate for being overly
Yeah.
restrictive and burdensome, with government regulation and prohibitions. I don't know. Any other commissioners have any thoughts on that, positive or, for or against?
I think the points that have been brought up are very good, and I agree with, continue to look at it and try to, put the best program that we put together, kind of like maybe be the model program for, the surrounding area.
Sure.
And don't do anything until we know we're 100% in agreement that it's the right thing to do.
So as a starting point, allowing this a short-term rental from, as a sublet, essentially, a short-term sublet, the alternative would be we strike that and we don't allow that. Pros and cons, do we go out the gate with a less restrictive model, or do we strike that now? If we're less restrictive and we allow that as written, it can always, if it turns out to be a problem, we can always pull it back.
Right.
Right?
I think some of that's gonna fall on licensing as well, because like Kimberly said, they're gonna have to show proof from whoever they're renting the place from, that they're allowed to do this.
Right.
You know,
And
it's
the
no
same
different
goes with
than-
the condo
Yeah.
association.
Most renters are.
Exactly, I mean, it was always like, when I lived in apartments here in town, it was, if I was going to adopt an animal, before I went to the place, I had to get permission from my landlord, and then take that or take my lease that showed it was okay for me to do it before I was even allowed to adopt an animal.
Okay,
So it's
good.
kind of, I think, along the same kind of lines, where they would have to have proof, I would imagine, for licensing like that in writing,
Okay, good.
so.
So everyone's comfortable with, as I said, the less restrictive were as written with allowing rental? Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
I'm sorry, did you have?
No,
sounded like you
yeah,
had
I
something more
agree
to say on
with
that. Okay.
exactly what Kimberly had with the grease analogy. I know some of my coworkers, who are younger, millennials, they typically rent, so, they have shallow roots. So I think it's probably not a bad idea.
Well, an important context to think about this in is we have a lot of developments that haven't necessarily been built yet, but
Right.
they're coming, where we have more high-end apartments, and the intent is to build that market with the millennials, as you mentioned. So it's entirely possible that, when South Street or some of the other developments hit, we could have this grow. So we're going to, and to your point about the percentage, which I'd like to get to, that may very well come into play, right? My thought is, I don't think we need to build this into either the zoning regulation or the licensing, but it's fair to say that in the case of whatever the village puts out there as a regulation, if a particular association has more restrictive rules, the village does not, the association's rules, the tighter rules apply, right?
That'd be probably the licensing, we would discuss that, yeah. Because generally, villages don't have to uphold covenances per se if it doesn't violate our rules.
Right.
But with this specific licensing program, we're gonna want some assurances that they aren't violating anything else. Because-
Well, I do know the crime-free ordinance requires every year you have to submit your lease.
Right.
And you have to show that the amendment, crime-free amendment is included as a rider on the lease. So that, I know that's not part of this, but is the thought that when we get to licensing, that's the crime-free ordinance is gonna apply, and they're gonna have to be licensed through that as well?
They're not subject to crime-free housing program because these are owner-occupied, doing the short-term rentals. So the crime-free housing is for those people that do the long-term rental. So this would not apply to them, the crime-free housing, but it would just be handled more through the licensing application and review process regarding anyone who's choosing to do short-term rental and might be in a lease or, not the owner of the property.
And if it was a
Well-
renter, they would have already gone through the crime.
Yeah,
scene.
technically, yeah.
Program.
If it was a renter,
Yeah.
yeah, their landlord.
Well, the owner would have.
The owner would have
Yeah.
gone through that program.
Well, okay, so that's outside the purview of what we're doing right now. I would just like to, for the record, on my own opinion, that I think there's already a track record here in town of concerns about that. So when they get to that, I would be an advocate for the crime-free housing ordinance could maybe be amended to include this somehow, even if it's, some sort of modified approach to it. But I think it should, it should apply. So, item P, footnote P, or I forget, endnote P.
Yep.
The 500-foot limit on all property lines from another short-term rentals property. Just to make sure that we're all understanding what we're saying here and in agreement. If, for instance, you had a property that was not a short-term rental, but it was a rental, and then you had a short-term rental come up right next to it. According to the way we have this written, that would be allowed. Right? Okay. So
Yeah.
is that clear? Everyone understands that and is okay with that? I just want to make sure that we're defining our terms. It's just 2 short-term rentals can't be within 500 feet.
Correct.
Well, how about that? I thought I had one more point. I guess I don't.
If I can add to that too,
Sure.
but if the business feels like they're threatened because of a rental, I know this is maybe future, people, you mentioned about potentially taxing if there is an issue to equal the level of the playing field if need be. But-
That could be an approach the village board might take down the road.
Okay. I do have one more
I
comment.
mean, having varying tax rates on, or
Well, no,
fees, or?
Instilling a hotel tax on STRs.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so if you're, if, say there's one place it's, not to say that one would totally take all the business away, but, one bed not being occupied is probably a big thing to the business owner. But getting back to, Lucas mentioned about if he moved in somewhere and somebody had the license, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but would there be potential to put like a timeline, whereas if you have the license but you haven't rented out in a year or 18 months, or at least they had one renter, or say there's one renter but they've stayed for 29 days, so maybe a minimum rental amount that they accrued in that time frame, then the license would be forfeited, so that if Lucas did move in, he could actually apply for a license if the neighbor has effectively a dead license.
That could be done, but I mean, we're not talking like we're having a huge amount of competition. That seems like that's a lot of involvement and,
Yeah,
looking
understood.
into. I see your point. Maybe that would be applicable in other touristy towns where maybe that's, a tighter market. I don't foresee us having quite that issue here, but it's something to note. But, we're going to test run this. It'll be a yearly license. It is a first come, first serve. And
Okay.
people who really want to do it will just have to kind of know to get in. And
So if they don't
Yeah.
renew in time, that license becomes available.
Yep.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the commission? Good. Any parting comments from the petitioner?
No, thank you for your great comments. I like how you guys always keep me on my toes. Think of something I didn't think of.
Okay, I knew there was one more thing, not from me. I just want, before we exit the public hearing, Commissioner Gray brought up the topic of the 25%. So I just wanted to toss it out there and see if there are any thoughts about whether that number is a good place to start and we go from there. Do we, I don't, it didn't sound like anyone was looking to increase it. Are there any thoughts about taking it to, say, 20, for instance? Just toss it out there, consensus.
I think it's a good place to start.
And that primarily will be condominiums and apartments. It's not gonna deal with townhouses or residential houses.
Correct.
Correct. Regardless of the rental structure, whether it's condo or apartment, it's really based on the design of the dwelling
Multifamily
itself.
versus, yeah, a single family.
Yeah.
So I would agree that 25 seems high, but I would be okay with leaving it at 25 as a starting point and see what happens.
Sure.
Or-
Yeah, I mean,
I think
yeah.
the associations are gonna dictate.
Yeah.
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 I totally agree. I think that, I think as this gets out, the associations are probably gonna ratchet that down to at least 20, if not
Less.
something less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay for the village to, say, well, we allow this, and then they can do something even more restrictive.
Correct.
Well, I can imagine if this does take off and we have 100 of them village-wide, that the idea of the hotel tax may be looked at again.
It should be.
Because
Yeah.
it's,
Oh, 100%.
it's a lot of money on the table.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no further comments or questions, opportunity for public comment, seeing nobody here, I would entertain a motion to close, well, before I do that, it sounds like we're ready to take action on this evening, right? All right,
Agreed.
so I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
I move
Seconded.
Commissioner Augustiniak, second Commissioner Gray. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, public hearing is closed. Let me see. I think we're ready to proceed here, right, Kimberly? We don't have any standards that we need to run through or anything like that. This is just strictly a text amendment?
Correct.
Okay. So we have a single recommended motion, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. I would entertain a motion on this matter. Who would like to read?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the village board approve text amendments to Section 2 definitions and Section VB Schedule 1, Schedule of Permitted Uses of the Village of Tinley Park zoning ordinance, as indicated in staff's most recent staff report dated 3/7/2019. The proposed text amendments would amend the definition for short-term rental in Section 2, definitions, and amend portions of Section V.B. Schedule 1 to allow short-term rental as an accessory use to residential dwelling units in the residentially zoned districts, subject to certain conditions listed in a new footnote P and Q. The proposed text amendment would further clarify Section V.B. Schedule 1 by limiting the distance of short-term rentals in the single-family detached homes and creating a percentage of the number of short-term rentals permitted in a multi-family building.
Second.
Motion Commissioner Gray, second Commissioner Augustiniak. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Stanton?
Yes.
Engel?
Yes.
Manning?
Yes.
Gatto?
Yes.
Gray?
Yes.
Aitchison?
Yes.
Augustiniak?
Aye.
Vic?
Yes.
Chairman Shaw?
Aye. That sounded like that was unanimous, sir.
This will go to the village board on March 19th.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, our next item here is a workshop, secondary front yard, corner fence height, text amendment. So, let's have at it.
Yeah, so this is a couple quick corrections just on the staff report. It does say public hearing up on top. It's not a public hearing, just a workshop and discussion here. And then it's section 3-J, so on the last round of, the last time we changed the code, it changed from H to J, so it's section 3J. So this is, again, just a discussion about secondary front yard fences, so talking about tweaking codes once you've kind of tested them out. That's kind of what we're doing here. Staff's proposing a draft text amendment to the fence regulations. This would be an amendment to when a fence is permitted to encroach into a secondary front yard, commonly a corner side yard might be called as well. So when a fence is allowed to encroach into that, it's usually allowed to encroach up to 10 feet if it meets certain standards. Right now, that fence is limited to 4 feet in height, and it's got to be open design. So this amendment would move that height limit up from 4 feet to 5 feet. Just as a quick background to the fence code in general, most of you guys were here, but there's a couple new people that in 2017, there was pretty extensive work done to the fence code regulations. So the Plan Commission had quite a few meetings, Zoning Board of Appeals, the Community Development Committee of the board. So went through quite a bit. The goals of that were primarily with corner fences. They're kind of the toughest thing to regulate, and there really is no kind of standard out there that between every town. It tends to be an issue with corner lots. So there's quite a bit of work there to kind of get a code that, one, is safe, two, keeps communities looking good, because fences can detract if they're done incorrectly, especially on corner lots. And again, I think this code's been applied pretty well over the last year. So it was approved in January 2018. We were kind of testing it out, worked pretty well. The primary issue came up was in regards to pools. So there's a pool regulation that requires basically for safety purposes that you either have a 5-foot fence around your yard, the entirety of your yard, or you'd have to fence around your actual pool. So it'd have to be an attached fence to the pool. So that kind of became the biggest discrepancy, complaints, concern that we had from residents that were looking to do fences was, they wanted to bump their fence out into the secondary front yard as well, but they had a pool, so they weren't able to go up to 5 feet. So that's kind of how this came up. In our purview, 2 variations were approved in 2018 that did allow for a 5-foot high open design fence to go into the secondary front yard. 2 that either had a pool or were going to have a pool in the near future and kind of use that as part of their argument. So we thought this was something we should look at. First, we kind of initially looked into the pool fence height. The International Residential Code, kind of the codes that all communities use, only require 4 feet for the pool fence height. So we kind of looked into that and said, are we doing something completely odd with the pool fence heights? Kind of surveyed the nearby communities, so New Lenox, Mokino, Orland Park, Frankfurt, Lamont, and there's quite a few more that all have kind of the standard 5 feet fence requirement. I think that's just for some kind of additional security for small children that still may be able to get over a 4-foot fence height. So kind of in the grand scheme of wanting to keep some additional safety, we don't think it's a bad thing to have 5 feet. We were took a look at the corner fence regulations then to kind of look into this and kind of figuring, is there a big difference between a 4-foot high fence and a 5-foot high fence when it's open design? I think I have them in here. It's obviously taller, but there's not a huge difference there. So our proposal And here's kind of an example of one of the variations that were approved in 2018, showing the fence coming out 10 feet, and then they were gonna put a pool back there. So that was approved. So our proposal, again, is just to raise that one requirement, change a 4 to a 5, avoid variations when they're not kind of needed, and seeing as they were already kind of approved. And seeing that the aesthetics are unlikely to change for these. So it still is gonna have the required setback. They can still only encroach 10 feet into the required secondary yard, secondary front yard, but would just change that height. So, safety concerns are, the primary safety concern is more with the visibility, I think, in around corners. So all those standards will still stay in place. I'll have the draft text amendment if we go to public hearing. I'll have that a little more ironed out so you can see the whole code, and all the standards that are still in place there. I think that's it for our presentation.
Okay. Quick question on that. Currently, there's administrative approval of 4 feet. And this essentially is raising that to 5 feet?
Correct.
Right? This is not, it still requires administrative approval. This is not by right. Correct?
Yeah, it's administrative approval if they meet a certain set of conditions, which include things like safety. Basically, if staff has no concerns in regards to safety, we issue those. If for some reason we do have some safety concerns, we can still require it to go through a variation process, so.
Okay.
Yes, it would still require that administrative
So
review.
an administrative variance, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. It's not by right. So effectively, the bottom line of this whole thing is taking it from 4 foot to 5 foot.
Correct.
Everything else.
Changing a 4 to a 5, everything else will stay the way it is.
Good. All right. I'll just kind of, instead of calling by name, just aim down this direction. Anyone have any questions or comments?
None.
You know, you're tossing out safety. What safety concerns can you provide me based on the open design?
Sure, the main thing that comes up, I guess, in regards to safety with corner fences or visibility from driveways or street corners. So that's the main thing we talk about when it's safety with corner fences. With the 50% open design, that typically keeps some level of visibility there. If you had a driveway, for example, right next to on the fence, you could still see someone walking.
Right.
You could still kind of see if something was happening as if you were reversing or pulling into the driveway. So that's the main thing we talk about when it comes to visibility. The raising the height's not going to really affect safety or safety concerns.
And then what about, well, because this just comes to when we had the discussion last year regarding the open design. When I see in regards to safety, I'm thinking about child safety and how our codes, how our ordinance right now is for the fencing. You know, I see it to be unsafe for children. If the spacing between the open design, if that spacing is larger than 4 inches.
There's different ways you
Yeah.
could design it. So
Well, right, but all, you know,
That's the homeowner's responsibility, I mean.
yeah, so they'd be able to make
some
gaps,
kid comes
you
and
know,
puts
that
their
are
head
this
in, that's their
big.
fault.
well, right, but, you know, I brought this on, you know, again, you know, last year, when we have a business, you know, when they have some type of railing or whatever, the space in between the bollards or pickets or what have you has to be less than 4 inches,
Right.
because a child go through.
But
And then-
again, that's why you have homeowners insurance. So if somebody gets stuck in there,
Well, right,
they're
but, you
gonna
know.
sue the homeowners insurance. They're not gonna come after the village.
Yeah, so
Well-
I should say, I believe the IRC in regards to pools, so the IRC does have spacing requirements for
Well,
that,
right.
that I
right.
believe
But
are.
again, you know, It's
So
just
if
my
they,
comment.
if,
it's
if they don't
my-
have a pool,
That's what we're trying to do.
essentially, we wouldn't
Right.
regulate the spacing.
spacing.
Because they wouldn't even have to have a fence.
No, I understand it, right, but, so if we're making public for me, we make public buildings that people come in and out of safe for fence, any type of opening, for any child to, so they won't get stuck or what have you, or escape, for whatever reason. I would definitely want to have my home be childproof. So again, that's just, that's what I'm saying, for safety, what is the village considering safe? That's it, that's my comment.
Okay.
So we adopt the International Residential Code and whatever the requirements are of that code, right?
Yeah, like Dan had said, the IRC for pools will regulate the barrier, which you can use as a fence. But if someone was just to put a fence up, that's just a kind of enclosure yard. There is no minimum, distance between the railing.
Right, and that's a point that is already existing. And what we're addressing here is simply the height.
Yeah.
And if I'm interpreting, I mean, this, I think to Commissioner Manny's point about what sort of safety concerns there might be, generally visibility, but realistically, as I'm hearing it anyway, I think that the likelihood that staff would not approve something, it's not very likely you wouldn't approve it. However, there might be a particular situation that we can't envision right now, but when staff does a review, you still need that ability to address it, right? Okay, all right, good. Anything down here, guys?
Just to re-clarify what you just said, then go to a 5-foot fence around the yard versus a 4-foot fence, and you would not need a fence around the pool.
Correct.
If I have a pool, I would no longer need a fence,
A second
a
fence.
second fence.
Correct. You could if you wanted to, but the
Right.
code wouldn't require
Right.
it.
Perfect. All right,
Big
good.
cost savings. too.
Yep, yep,
And I think that's the main issue that came up is aesthetics and cost.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people don't want because the fence can actually get, well over 6 feet, which is our fence requirement. If you put it on top of the pool, they could be higher than 6 feet.
right.
That fence. So a lot of people don't like the way they look for the pool as well as.
Now, would there be any requirement on the fence type that would have to go in? And I'm just thinking that.
There are material requirements that we
Good.
put in place.
Good, so like no wooden fence, for example.
You can do wood, yeah. You can do wood, vinyl, aluminum.
Kind of what I'm thinking is that, and one of my big things is, you drive around and you see, you go down the street and on a main street, and there's all these fences, but they're all different type of fences that are like discolored, and some are good and some are bad. So aesthetically, obviously doesn't look good. But if we had something that said you had to have either vinyl only or, different types of vinyl, and there's some nice fences out there that look, they look like wood. Just aesthetically for the neighborhood, I think would look.
Well, I think, so, again, what this is addressing is just simply that administrative variance for the height.
Exactly.
The background where he discussed what we went through in 2017.
Right.
I know you and I were here. I
Right.
don't remember how many of the others were here, but that's where we went into all of those discussions, and we ended up with
Right.
where we're at now. Certainly is, just like this, at some point, we
Yeah.
could revisit
Yeah.
the material
Yeah. Good
thing.
point. Okay.
But I think where we ended up
Yeah, I think
was
there was.
that it was a,
there
it was a
point-
property maintenance issue.
Right.
Yeah,
as-
and there's some cost that, from a property rights and just village-wide, is people want wood fences, are you gonna require PVC fences from the fly?
Right.
There's costs differences between there. It sounded like there was some discussion on that, whatever it is, but.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion.
So it-
I mean, because there are very high-quality wood fences, and there are very low-quality
Right.
PVC fences.
Yeah, and there is
So-
property maintenance side of it too, so if a fence is peeling paint, or it has, splinters coming out of it, or it's falling apart, our property maintenance should be on that, or see it, they call that,
Yep.
standards on that.
So with respect to increasing the administrative height a foot, any additional concerns or
Well, I-
opposition or anything?
Well, I just want to expand on Commissioner Stanton's comment regarding, so we're going 5 feet now because we have a pool. So now we don't have to enclose our pool now, right? So currently, for a fence right now that's around the pool, we do have the space limitation of 4 inches or less than 4 inches. So are we gonna then, if they're gonna go remove their fence around the pool and now have a fence, and if they have an open style fence, are we gonna put that limitation for 4 inches? Because then that's the safety concern.
Yeah,
Some
I'll-
kid around the
I'll
block will
check.
just go through, because right now, raising it to 5 feet is just for bigger kids, so they won't jump the fence.
Right.
Because you won't see a
Yeah,
little kid
and I
doing that, but
believe-
I could see a little kid going through it, and now the pool's not enclosed, they could get up and then we have a
Yeah,
emergency.
I believe the IRC has that spacing requirement for the pool around the
Right,
yard as well.
but again,
so-
but if we're raising this to 5 feet now for this particular situation on what we have here on screen, so then we're gonna make them, okay, yeah, you have a pool, you could get rid of your enclosure, but what happens to that limitation for a child won't be able to pass through, climb up on the deck or what have you, and then, we have a
So-
situation.
That's a really valid point on child
So-
safety. So let me just pose two scenarios to staff and make sure that we're covered on that, right? Assuming the IRC code applies and it has those limitations, you have one scenario where somebody doesn't have a pool and they have a fence that's, 5 feet, and they want to get a pool permit. Staff is going to look at the fence and make sure that it meets the safety requirements for having a pool, right?
Correct.
The other scenario is they have a pool and they want to put up a fence. Staff's also going to look at it from that perspective, right?
Correct.
So-
Part of our permit review.
So I think that it should be covered there,
Well,
Right.
so,
yeah, so. Good, okay. As far as the workshop goes, do you feel you have enough
Yep, I think we
direction?
have those
This is
correct.
gonna go to the ZBA for review and then back to us?
Correct, yeah, so we'll go to ZBA next week on March 14th, they're gonna do a review, they see a lot of variations on this, so, they'll take a review and then it'll be back here for public hearing.
Good, all right. If there's no further questions or comments on that matter, we will move on to our zoning map. Last item is discussion review annual zoning map approval.
Yeah, so, the state of Illinois has a statute requirement that basically villages kind of officially approve their map every year by the end of March. This isn't changing any zoning, it's not amending the map, it's not doing anything, all that would have happened prior to this. So this is basically just saying, yes, this is correct, this is our map. Sometimes we catch errors in it as well, so, that we would correct those. The only one this year was I believe 2 meetings ago, we had the CTF Illinois property was going into property on Oak Park Avenue and Centennial Lane. There was one parcel that was misidentified or kind of taken out of the PUD, the Bremen Town Hall PUD that should have been in it. So we had referenced the ordinance number and everything in that meeting. There's one parcel taken out, so we put that back in the zoning map, but otherwise, there's no changes from the 2017 zoning map. And again, this just, so it's called, we're approving it in 2019, but it's everything that happened in 2018. So, we're just looking for your guys' review and say it's okay. would go to the village board on March 19th, so. I don't believe there's a motion in here, but I did do a quick motion on the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, I have a real quick question, and Kimberly, this is based on a conversation we had earlier. We're talking about zoning downtown, and that's something that I think you were gonna look into. Is that, it's not relevant to this at all, right? We don't need to get an answer on my question for that, right? Okay. Sorry, I'm not trying to be sinister there or anything. I just didn't want to, it was an odd question that I asked her earlier today, and I don't think it was relevant. I just wanted to make sure. Any questions or comments regarding the zoning map?
Nope.
Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion on this matter.
I would like to make a motion to recommend that the village board approves of the official zoning map for 2018 as drafted and presented to the plan commission at this meeting.
Second.
A motion, Commissioner Atchison, second Commissioner Augustiniak. I guess we can do
You can probably just do a voice.
all in favor of approving the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, sorry, my brain stopped for a second there, guys. All right. Good of the order.
Great. Just wanted to mention that hopefully you're all aware of March 13th at 4 p.m. There is a groundbreaking event for the North Street improvements. The village is going to be doing infrastructure improvements, anticipation for future development in that area. So that's a groundbreaking event. The plaza is still being designed. It's not at a point yet where it's completely designed, but they do have some illustrative exhibits that you'll see, but this will be coming forward to Plan Commission and some other public meetings for input as part of the site plan approval process. So just wanted to let you know that although there's plans out there, it's still going to be coming towards this group. This is just to kick off the infrastructure improvements that are going to be needed to be done regardless. So that's what they're going to be kicking off. But if you have any questions on that project, feel free to call our office. Paula's been kind of spearheading it from the planning standpoint, and then marketing is heavily involved in it in regards to programming it. So it's an exciting project. So other than that, that's really the only highlight we have.
So I have a quick question for you, just because I haven't heard anything on it lately. The property 191st and Harlem Woodman's, is that what's the status of that? Is that kind of dead? Is it still being?
Still conversations, but nothing else moving forward.
Okay.
Did they have to go back for more soil testing or something like that, or was it with the soil, or?
That I
No.
don't know.
I remember that.
Okay.
There's also price
Just
issues with-
curious if that went, that's a school district property,
Correct,
correct?
right.
And so they're in negotiations with the school district and so, but nothing interesting or new to report on that one, right?
No.
Okay.
I did, for one other thing, I got a positive note, I did get a call from the South Street team for the Boulevard Central Station. They are gearing up for their construction drawings and are going to have a pre-construction meeting with us before they formally submit. So there is progress being made with that plan, and hopefully we can get them in for building permit.
Great. Sounds good. Any questions or comments from the commission? Okay, hearing none. Comments from the public? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Move Commissioner Gray, second Commissioner Augustiniak. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.